Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here, and Merry Christmas! This is our Christmas Day episode, pre-recorded because I'm not on here on Christmas Day. I'm having dinner with my friends in our usual Friendsgiving, Christmas friends. It's the same group I have Thanksgiving with, and we're having a big meal and having fun. But I'm putting this out here so that everyone else has a little present to open while you're digesting your Christmas dinner. We're going to have our regular weekly episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show I'm doing to celebrate the fact that 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the entire hobby of tabletop role-playing games. And if you've gotten this far in the series, you know that I do this by interviewing folks who have worked on the game Dungeons and Dragons and other games too. And while I do that, I will be drawing a cartoon homage to a classic piece of D&D art. Today, my guest is one of the first people I know who came out of the third party, the third edition third party Scrum, not the right word for it, but when things were really going good, and made a full career out of himself, not having come in from any other angle, which makes a lot of his career very interesting and different than a lot of the people we've talked to so far. It's Mike Mearls. He then had I'll let him tell everything. He was in charge of the D&D team for a while. He's one of the main designers on 5th edition and a bunch of stuff before that. And he's doing some work on the electronic D&D stuff now. Very involved, very interesting guy. So let's bring him on here to chat with us. It is Mike Mearls. Hey, Mike. Thank you very much for joining us, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too, and anyone else out there who celebrates. Otherwise, if you're in the northern hemisphere, it only gets brighter from here, right?
So, that's right. Yay.
And if you're in the south, the darkness is coming. Yeah, if you're in Australia, the darkness is coming for you.
How bad did I do on my intro for you? On a scale of 1 to 10, how off was that?
No, that was pretty close. The only thing is the electronic D&D thing. That was something I worked on years ago, back when I was still at Wizards. So that's not something I'm working on now. Just to not get anyone or anyone who's working on it right now is hey, what? Who is this cat?
Fair.
But anyway, when we start talking about the future, I'm sure that'll be a big part of it. Is the digital tools. I mean, look at us right now, right? Who would have thought? One day, right? We would have been the 50th anniversary of D&D. If you go back and look at all the stuff, I think it was in the early 80s. There was an article in Dragon about one day maybe computers will be advanced enough that we can play D&D directly, but now we get to connect, and it's an everyday thing. So thanks for having me on. Thanks for the time.
Oh no, it's really good to have you here. You and our paths didn't cross when I was doing creative work much. I was kind of out and about when you were coming in, but it's because of friends and industry, and then later on I came in when you were in charge of the team to do some contract work on the management side.
Because I joined, I started at Wizards in 05, I think. It was 04 or 05. No, I think it's 05, because, and this probably says a lot about me. The Red Sox won the World Series in 04, and I was in Boston for that, so I know I definitely couldn't have been working at Wizards. So I'm pretty sure it was 05. And then, because I think you would have been in Upper Deck at the time, if I remember right.
Yeah, no, you joined about the same time I left. So, so I think that the interesting thing is, I think that you started doing publishing, even self-publishing or third-party publishing, about the same time that Wizards and I parted ways for the first time, first of three, and I went in and started doing with another couple of former Wizards folks who do the game mechanics as a company. And so we were both doing third-party stuff at about the same time. That's certainly when I first became aware of your work, and then so I got to watch that. And just as I was leaving Seattle, you were coming in.
Yeah, someone leaves town, someone comes to town,
That's
right?
right.
That's the yeah, so I got my start in tabletop. So I didn't start with D&D. I started with as far as design.
Right.
I actually
Well, how about
started
just
this is
playing? How did you get into playing
oh
uh,
so
hobby?
yeah, like a lot of people, yeah, my vintage, like Gen X. I got into fantasy first with the Rankin Bass Hobbit. Like that was shown on network television. Yeah, back when there was like you had three choices, what you were gonna watch that night. And so so I remember seeing the Rankin Bass Hobbit, and I just loved it. Like I thought it was amazing, and it wasn't just the idea of the story, which obviously I really enjoyed, but of this broader world that it was a part of. There's this dragon who you get the history of it, right? It's not
Right.
just here's a story. It's here's what happened to create this story. The entire dragon, taking over the Lonely Mountain, all that stuff. And this is around 1980, 1981. My older brother was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons through Boy Scouts. I think they would play when they would go out camping. And so he got a hand-me-down copy of the 1978 basic rulebook, the Holmes edition.
Right.
The cover had fallen off. The pages were stapled together because this is a rulebook they probably took when they went camping, so it was in pretty bad shape. And so when he for him, I think D&D was much more caught up in the fad of it. The early '80s. I think for a summer played with his friends, then gave it up. But I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And so I think I paid $1 for it. I gave my brother $1, whatever my allowance or money I earned. Yeah, and it was the rule book, and it was the Keep on the Borderlands without the map. So it was also missing the cover. And so I had to try to figure out the game based on that, which I gotta say, looking back, I'm a bit surprised. Well, maybe not. Maybe I have a kid of my own. She's 10. I think sometimes kids can be more resourceful than we give them credit for, especially when they're in rural New Hampshire with nothing else to do but ponder this rule book. So I actually got the rules pretty much figured out.
So I
But
mean,
having
that's
Keep
an
on the Border,
interesting thing. I mean, despite the decade shift in time, maybe not even at about the same time. Uh, so many people that like I came in through the Holmes book too, right? That was my first intro, and it's interesting to me to see the number of people who are in the industry where that's true for, and I tell you when I finish this series of the 50 years, I've got a bunch of different group discussions I want to have, and one of them I want to have is about introductory games and how they've changed because I mean, as you point out, compared to what we do today, the Holmes book is just a whole bunch of info thrown at you, not super well presented, and you've got to want it. You got to work with it, but it's there, and
yeah,
and we all learned how to do it. And I think that to an extent, the newer introductory products, while they are better at getting you past I don't know anything to playing something, they lag in the what they give you, where they take you beyond that. What the kid who's interested, who really wants it, doesn't have that kind of 60-page game for D&D. Like there are games out there to do it, but
yeah.
the big box introductory games that their parents are likely to buy for them don't provide that anymore.
Well, I think what's interesting is when you look at it, with streaming and everything, and this is what I found. I worked on intro products for different game lines over the years. What you find is overwhelmingly, especially to nowadays, people don't learn from products. They learn from the internet. They go to YouTube. The And what's interesting about that is when you think about like what's the thing they need, it's interesting. Like the product is it's almost like the product that you want to give somebody is the product that lets them recruit other people. Because like what I found for me was like I was so excited about this that I like wanted other people to play. And so I would just kind of like be the annoying kid who was getting my friends to try this game. But where it fell flat was, look, I'm like at the time like 7 or 8 or 9, whatever, around that time period. I am not good at teaching the game, right? Like that's definitely a skill. So
Yeah.
it's almost like in some ways when you think of the product level, not to get like all like the two of us getting super inside, be like, here's how like we manage like because this is stuff you've done, I've done. But yeah, I'd almost feel like it's almost the product needs to be the thing that is equipping the person who wants to play, who is like, no, I will, So a person I worked with years ago at Wizards on D&D, they described it as like, look, people who really love D&D will crawl through a broken glass to play. Our challenge is getting the people for whom like broken glass, like, right? Like, nuts?
Well,
No, right?
yeah.
And so that's, the tricky thing, right? And often it's the guy who's crawled through the broken glass who's all like, hey, let's do it. This is easy. Here's a tax form to fill out to make your character, right? Like, okay, wait, what are we missing here?
I mean, interesting. This is, and maybe we should come back to most of this conversation towards the end. This is a kind of thing that usually happens towards the end of these conversations. But one of the advantages, looking at the 50 years D&D having its moment, one of the reasons it is just, I think, what you're saying with the internet has gotten rid of that I don't understand what the game is.
Yeah.
But it hasn't replaced that the step that was always missing, which is between I understand what it's doing and how do I do it myself.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And you still need someone to crawl over broken glass. Someone needs to get that pass. Or before the internet, it was you didn't learn it yourself. Someone had to teach you how to play. And when that happened, it was a DM, and you had that learning going on, right?
Yeah.
But in every case, like what you're describing for you, what happened for me, I didn't have anyone to run for it. We had this beautiful, imperfect book, which had a lot of broken glass for us to crawl through, and we did it, and we dragged our friends with us, or until we found another group, or they say, "Get up out of the glass, here, let's play."
Yeah, no, and that's it. Because looking back, my experience with role playing games, I had D&D, and realistically, when I was in second, third grade, fourth grade, playing D&D was really like we would run around with sticks, making references to D&D, terms and ideas. Like, oh, we're gonna fight. There's an ogre. Or it's a bugbear. Well, we kind of know what a bugbear is because we read the monster manual. So if one person was like, oh, there's bugbears, let's fight them. That's what we're hitting our sticks with. We all knew what that meant. But it really wasn't until middle school with a smaller subset of kids that I knew that we actually started playing the actual, we're rolling dice, playing the game. Because it did take someone who's a bit more really dedicated to this specific form. I also think there might be an age element to it too. I have a 10-year-old, and she likes playing games that are really much more fast paced, much more social,
right,
much more interactive,
right.
But I know that's how games like Uno, Exploding Kittens, stuff like that. But I can kind of see how her tastes have changed as she's getting older, and she's thinking a bit more about strategy games and things like that. But it definitely is a process. I don't know, someone who knows about this stuff would probably have a better answer. But it feels like there is also just an element of what point as play matures, it changes.
Right. There's a point in about the year 2000, right after third edition launch, where the brand team had a consultant, an educational learning consultant. What do kids understand at what ages? And there was a plan to do a series of step-up projects that would teach them the various things that are part of D&D in other games, so that by the time they were the right age for D&D, they had the tools to do D&D. And the only one of those products ever came out was Pokemon Junior. Was the very first step, was the concept of you are playing a character who's not you, and it's controlled by this game element. And also it was to teach the parents. The whole thing was teach the kids how to do it, and teach the parents that it's not scary. It's a story game, and that was the very first of I think it was 5 or 6 steps of products.
Oh, wow.
And we had talked to the consultant about what do kids do at this age, what do they like. Let's make the games lean towards that. So it was Pokemon Junior was a 6 years old up, and then we had 8 and up was going to be a Pokemon Master game, which got designed. It got fully designed and mostly through editing before this whole thing got canceled for not making enough money, which is a different sad story because it made $800,000 in the first year, or sold 800,000 units in the first year, which should be a success in anyone's book. But that's one of
You
my
think?
sad stories. Yeah, so as Pokemon Junior, we had done a game. We had a Harry Potter game that was mostly done. We had a license with Crocodile Hunter. It was going to be a step, probably about the same level with Harry Potter. And it was going to be these series of things which led up to the D&D intro game and then D&D.
Interesting.
Um,
I mean, it
and I
makes
still
sense,
think it was a
right? Yeah.
brilliant idea that, I mean, the company gave it 6 months or a year to go, and we got one product out before they decided this does no.
That is the it's I'm not going to say it's funny. It's funny in a sad way because you're looking at
Yeah,
video games struggling really mightily. But I remember being in meetings, about that point where people would say things, business people, would say things like, "We want the next World of Warcraft. Can you make that?" And they'd be like, "Well, okay, here's how we make the next World of Warcraft. We start by inventing a new genre of video game. In Blizzard's case, the real-time strategy game. We do that, and it's a hit, and we do a sequel to it. But then we do the science fiction version, which actually then takes off because it creates an entire new way to play games, competitive, RTS.
yeah.
Also, if Korea could go into an economic downturn at the same time to get people to play games because they don't have enough work, that'll also help. And then we make World of War. No, we don't make World of Warcraft yet. Now we make another new genre of game. We make Diablo. We make the action role play game. So we invent another entire new genre. And then the point being,
Yeah,
the problem so much in games is that people want to go straight to step 12, and they don't realize that launching a successful game is a lot more like training for the Olympics. You don't just wake up one morning and decide, hey, it'd be fun to win a gold medal in the Olympic high jump, right? No, you start like at age 10 when someone points out, like, hey, this kid seems to be pretty good at track and field, and then they figure out, oh, here's where you're really strong, combined with kid also being like, I really enjoy doing this to the point I want to put a ton of effort into it.
yeah.
And then 10 years later, all those things, all high school, in the States, college, then, and then you're in the Olympics, right? But they just want, it's, September 1st and I've decided to become an Olympic high jumper, and December 31st, I'm winning the gold medal, right? Like
Yeah.
but that's classic, like when you have your business models don't align with the business success you want, and you don't understand the building the path, which is another entire stock market related thing we could go off on. But
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true in so many creative endeavors that people, particularly the business people, come in and see, I want to do this last step. How can I purchase the first 15 steps? Or can't
yeah,
we just use? They did it already. Let's just jump off it.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right, because it's they see the end result. There's also the classic business thing of you don't see the 30 failed
Right,
hacks
right.
at making World of Warcraft, and then
And
but
the
this is
dumb
good.
luck
Yeah.
factor, right?
Oh god, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
As you said,
StarCraft, yeah.
the number of things that could have been it and didn't
Yep.
because you know, the Super Bowl happened on that weekend and no one paid attention, or
Yep.
a new Brad Pitt movie came out and so they didn't pay attention, or there was a trucking company had problems and so everything was late being delivered and so it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But it could
Well,
have. It sure could
it
have.
could have, right? But that's the history of D&D, right? I mean, a lot of the reasons why D&D gets to
Yeah.
50 is because it does have this fan base and it's been able to last generationally, right? Like, does Peter Adkison buy, D&D? Does he say, does he step in and purchase TSR?
Right.
Without that, oh, I love this game, right? And I've heard interviews with him where he's talked about how a lot of the owners of Wizards thought this was a bad move. Like, why would we step in and buy this company? Even back in the 70s and 80s, like how much work people put into D&D because they just love the game,
Yeah.
and were willing to do it. And I don't think you get to 50 without people, creative people, fans, everyone being like, oh, I'm so into this, like I am gonna weather the bad times. The I say this as someone who, back when I was in high school, I bought a ton of those D&D collectible cards, right? Like just the ones that were just trading cards. I'm sure people like the business guy like, oh, this makes no sense. Maybe it's not making money, but like I love D&D. I thought those cards are cool, so I would buy, booster packs. I didn't call them booster packs at the time, but I'd buy stacks of those cards. And it's just, I love the game. I just thought it was a cool thing I wanted to own. And
Right.
that's powerful.
Now, people, the number of things which are successful with the core target audience, but fail because they're supposed to bring in a new audience, are huge. That those are all
Yeah.
those beloved things, like the cards. There are people that had them and loved them, but they were a miserable failure because they were supposed to get new people in, but it just didn't work.
So this is okay. So this is my thing about D&D. So now that I don't work on it directly, I can be very. I can tell the dirty laundry.
All right, hold on. I'm gonna switch over here so I get some drawing done. Otherwise, you and I are just gonna talk and nothing's gonna happen. All right, here we go. I'm doing the Sword Coast Adventures guide. Is my drawing today? So go ahead.
A very cool choice. Yeah, I love that piece. So one of the challenges when you look across D&D's 50 years, one of the challenges it has is like it goes through these booms and busts, right? The first edition comes out, it's the 70s, it's booming, all the stories of TSR's excesses. Oh no, did you lose me? Am I?
No, you're there.
Are you still getting me? Okay, cool. I'm getting a little chop on my end, but to make sure you're still getting me. Cool.
Yeah.
So
that'll happen.
D&D has these booms and busts it goes through, and I think a lot of it is that when you look at D&D, the challenge the game has over the course of its 50 years is that all of the complementary businesses, like you mentioned, these trading cards, right?
Yeah.
Well, there was a trading card game that was pretty much based on D&D called Magic the Gathering, right? Like you could easily see Richard Garfield taking that design.
Hey there, everyone. Sorry we had a little bit of a snag. So we lost about 4 or 5 minutes of conversation, but we're back, and I'm going to bring it back in. So I'm going to bring Mike on again. And you were talking about how you could see Richard Garfield going to TSR and them accepting it, and that changing everything. And that's so. I don't know if you want to continue with that thought exactly, or kind of roll on from there.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the point, when you think about D&D as a business, this entire it goes through good times, bad times. Is that D&D it seems like whenever D&D has had the chance to like move into another area, someone else has been there who stepped in and grabbed it. MMOs. D&D makes a ton of sense as an MMO. There've been multiple successful MMOs for D&D. But it hasn't had that like category leader like a World of Warcraft or an EverQuest, trading card games, right? I mean, there was Spellfire, but that was D&D chasing after Magic, and it's the thing that seems to keep happening to D&D in my experience is like, okay, so Magic the Gathering comes out first, and it's basically D&D the trading card game, right? Like if you show the art to people and they're like, oh, that looks like D&D, right? It's got elementals, it's got orcs, it's got wizards with lightning bolt, and that seems to be one of the things I find so interesting about D&D compared to other games, is that it's so inspirational that it keeps inspiring the games that like get in its way. Like there could be all these different types of D&D, but like the people who get inspired end up going off and making their own thing that then occupies a niche that like D&D could have moved into first.
One of the interesting things is on at least some of them, TSR did have the opportunity and opted not to. And I don't remember if Magic was offered to them, but certainly early on, because Peter, I remember, was looking for investors for Magic, and I can totally imagine him having made a pitch to someone at TSR, and I know that the upper management just didn't see it. They're like, this is a flash. This isn't going to do anything. And then suddenly they were chasing it. And I definitely remember being in a conversation in Lake Geneva with people who were saying, Warcraft was out, and they're like, "Why is this not the D&D? Like, why are we not doing this? Like, we have pitched this, and they've told us no, and now it's doing here. Why are we not doing it?" And so the in the in halls cynicism was like, "Well, we wouldn't do it like this. We would totally screw it up." But the that still the conversation was, "No, but we should be we can. It's us. Look, this is D&D for sure." I'm like, yeah, well, convince Lorraine of that, or get they put the millions of dollars behind it. They won't do it. Right? There were certainly also points where there were in-house discussions and arguments about why are we still making games? We should just do novels. About when you were talking about how D&D was ruling the roost at the bookstore, the profit margin on novels was much bigger than the profit margin on the games. But the fact of the matter is, they're an ecosystem. They rely on each other. Right? You need the games to drive the interest in those novels. And
that's
kind
the
of like
challenge.
what we talked about off screen. There are too many times that decisions were made because the company only wanted to do, why don't we just publish bestsellers? Let's not publish it. Let's only publish bestsellers.
It's so easy, right? Like, why do movie studios, like, clearly they're just doing it for fun, right? Like, they're just because just make hits, right? And that's such like a classic consultant line, right? Of like, the consultant comes in, they look at your successes, they just try to like categorize those as just like, oh yes, you could just do this and repeat it, and missing that, look, creativity, it's a volume game. It's a lot more. I always think of it like more like baseball than bowling, right? Bowling, if you want to be a professional bowler, you're going to be throwing lots of strikes, right? Professional baseball players fail 2/3 of the time, and that's good, right? If you only fail 2/3 of the time, you're one of the better hitters in the league.
The very best only fail 6 times out of 10.
Yeah,
like the best ever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly, right. And that's always the challenge when you're combining business with a game, especially a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where it's 50 years old, and I still don't think if anyone was to come to me and say, "I've cracked it. I know how to make a surefire role-playing game hit," that's insane. Like, it is still such a shadowy art, we still don't understand the products. I think you could have very meaningful argument over whether even like books are appropriate. Like, is that the best way to give someone a role-playing game? Like, does that actually make sense? I was actually just in a meeting yesterday talking about how, in some ways the role-playing game book, it makes sense when you're not playing. You're going to look at it and read the rules and learn it, or just get inspired. But when you're playing the game, nobody wants to spend their time playing the game flipping through the rule book, right? They want to play.
Right.
And so, like, what should the product actually look like? And then what I find, and this is, and I know kind of talking about like past, present, future. This gets more to the future. What I think is really interesting is when you look at Kickstarter, crowdfunding in general, and the online connectivity. Like, you can make a role playing game and then go talk to people who are playing it. It feels like we're very slowly, the technology is evolving in a way that lets role playing games thrive in a way they haven't been able to before. I've been in the tabletop business for 26 years now, and there's one constant. It's publishers complaining about distributors, and fans complaining about distributors. Everyone complaining about the distribution system. And obviously everyone's going to complain about everything, but role-playing games just have such a funny little niche in like distribution and sales. They're being distributed alongside board games and trading card games, and in a lot of ways it kind of makes no sense. Like, they just act very differently as products. even shelving them, right? Like we were talking about, like, can you do things like accessories like card packs and things? Well, in a lot of ways, a lot of game stores just don't have a way to shelve those next to their books without it looking kind of ugly or hacky.
Right.
But but yet when you look at when people are playing the game, things like cards and stuff like that are super useful. And the rise of dice, like dice are really interesting right now, where there's these collectible dice packs now. There's like the little store down the street from me has an entire front section, 2 displays and a segment of their front counter that's just dice. The and you wouldn't have seen that. I mean, I remember back when in the 90s, you might find like 6 pegs of, a peg, like a, little place where you hang stuff,
right,
of like, dice from Chessex, right? Like plastic tubes, and you could get blue dice, red dice, green dice, white dice, or black dice. Which ones do you want, right? And now it's like there's all different styles and materials and designs, and people are buying them because dice are cool, and but look how long it took us.
It's always been the case that's the thing about conventions, where you'd go and Chessex would be there, and everyone you'd always come back with a new set of dice.
Yep. And if you go to Gen Con or another big convention, you got to see the full Chessex display of dice, which was just mind blowing. There's all these different types of dice. Right. But your typical game store would have like 5, like primary color sets, and that's it. Because the distribution hadn't really quite figured it out. And for those of you watching, like, what often happens is, for a retailer, it's tricky to maintain, like, just track how many different products they're selling. It's tricky for distributors to track, like, there's 3,000 dice sets people could be ordering. Like, that's just a lot of work. And so, but now you're
saying, a lot of work.
It's,
the expense of stocking that, so you can sell one, right?
Yeah, you order, one set of each, the 100 different types of dice, and maybe you sell 30 of them. Then you're like, is anyone going to buy it? Whatever. But we're seeing that change now, right? Like, people are recognizing, oh no, there is a market here. We just, it just takes a little bit more work, but the juice is worth the squeeze, and so now dice are a thing, and it's funny to see that change, and the rest of it maybe still trying to catch up, as far as retail goes. Because I think it was the Brandon Sanderson role playing game this year that was like the second TTRPG, I think, to break 10 million, because I think the Avatar: The Last Airbender one broke 10 million too, which is wild, right? I mean, that's one product making them probably one of the biggest, never mind TTRPG companies, one of the biggest tabletop companies. But again, that's crowdfunding, right? That's going straight to the fans.
Yeah, and that also, that falls into something you and I had been saying to you before we came on. That's selling on people loving Brandon Sanderson and loving Avatar, not on whether or not this is a game they're ever gonna play, let alone love enough to play every week like they do D&D. And that's a challenge for Wizards, and a challenge for every RPG publisher, is that you have to know you love the game before you'll buy it. And that's why licensing has always been so tantalizing to the publishers, because if you get the Star Wars license, Star Wars people are going to buy it no matter what. And X number of them, some might argue a majority of them, are not going to play your game, and they're not really your customers. They're Star Wars customers, and you're borrowing them.
Yeah, exactly, right. But that's what gets you on shelves, because a store is going to be much more comfortable buying a Star Wars game.
Right.
A leg up, like, there was the new Star Wars trading card game. I think it came out earlier this year. And like, I'll admit, when I was looking at the playthroughs, like, I've been able to resist so far just because I don't have a regular trading card game group to play with. Yeah. But it did help when I was researching the game to go, oh, like, it's a lot cooler to, like, play this game. And just as a quick thing, it's a little bit like you build your deck, then you have like a hero card. So it's like, oh, I'm playing a Boba Fett deck. I have Boba Fett. Right. I start Boba Fett and play, then I play my cards. And it's a lot cooler to play that kind of game if, like, the card I start with is Darth Vader, as opposed to, like, some new character someone had to make up for a new IP, right? I mean, it might be a cool looking character, but it's a lot more resonant for me to think, oh, I'm going to make a Han Solo deck, or Chewbacca deck, and I can kind of think, what's that going to look like? The because I've got like the first few steps have already been cleared. The And I think that's one of the things that that role playing games struggle with to a bit is that the and this is where I think D&D has a real advantage, where D&D fantasy kind of is its own thing. That so many games now, like you can play D&D fantasy with a bajillion different video games, especially or even board
Right.
games. You can't have a shortcut that is it's hard to compete with, because at that point, if you're just redesigning D&D, well, why wouldn't you just play D&D? I work at Chaosium now, and one of the advantages we have is we have Call of Cthulhu, and you could try to play Call of Cthulhu with D&D, but it's tricky just because a lot of the fun in Call of Cthulhu is, well, getting into fights is a very bad idea. That's part of the conceit.
Right.
But in D&D, anyway, there was Call of Cthulhu D20, which was fun, but I ran a campaign with it, but there were some issues, like as the players gained levels and started to get more hit points and started to get better at fighting, like it was a little bit harder. It didn't quite feel as horror gothic horror, not gothic horror, but just cosmic horror based, as opposed to a Call of Cthulhu character. It's like, okay, your hit points never go up, right? Like this is all you'll ever have.
Right.
The
Right. Well, I mean, that's certainly, wow. This is just such a industry thing, right? The difference between D&D and role playing.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
so here's an interesting thing that's happened to us a lot recently. So my group, which generally plays Call of Cthulhu, um, though we try out different games. This is a Saturday night group that I'm in, and we played a lot of different companies' versions of a Cthulhu game, and always come back to Call of Cthulhu, right? For a lot of reasons. When I ask what my favorite game is, Call of Cthulhu is the one I will list as my favorite RPG, or the one I play most. But it's interesting to see that. But right now we are playing a game called Brindlewood Bay,
Oh, yeah.
which is a cozy mystery RPG that kickstarted a couple of years ago, year and a half ago. It's basically Murder She Wrote, the role playing game, but it's based not on a D&D style RPG. It's based on what's generally called the Powered by the Apocalypse engine, um, and I've been I think uh, our GM would say I've been complaining, and he's not that far off. But I think I've been opining about the thing that I think our hobby needs a different term. We've now Role playing has grown so much that there are subgenres that ostensibly are different games. They're different styles of playing, and if you just say I want to play a role playing game, and you're thinking a D&D style, the DM knows what's going on, and you're fighting everything along the way, and you're collecting treasure, but the you're actually playing one which is a story driven game where you're making up the story as a player, and the GM is just a different role amongst players. He doesn't know what's going on. You've got to decide that yourself, and particularly in a mystery solving game, an investigative game. I The reason I say I'm not complaining is I'm enjoying playing it, but I'm watching us fight it the whole way through because our entire group wants that first style, but this game is the other style, and it just struck me that it would be super helpful if we just had a nomenclature for that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's such an issue now, because to your point, things have grown so much. It's almost like and I'm gonna tortured metaphor, but here we go. When you
Go
think
for it.
when Settlers of Catan broke big in the 90s, I remember playing in like 1997 with a translation of the German rulebook that someone had downloaded from Usenet, because one of my friends had a German set they had somehow got their hands
Mm.
on. Is if then and I think this is the challenge, because Settlers comes out and it's a board game, and we are already pre-programmed to understand that there are many different types of board games. Going back
Right.
to like so the classic Hasbro sort of board game lineup, the Parker Brothers stuff. You could play Monopoly. You could play the game of life. You could play Parcheesi. You could play chess.
Right.
When we say board game, oh, which one, right? We just naturally say that. But D&D being such a distinct thing, like often when someone plays their first role-playing game, they have played nothing like that before. Even if they've played digital, style games like World of Warcraft, it's still a wildly different experience. And then I think what happens is we then say, okay, this is what this thing is. This is a role-playing game. Where I think where kind of the hobby wants to go is more like a board game, where it's like you don't get upset when you sit down to play a deck building game. Hey, where are the tiles? Where are the resource cards, right? Like, no, of course, this is a different game. But I think with D&D, because like just the basic procedure of a role-playing game is so distinct, and when you've learned it, it's so new that I think for a lot of players, they just naturally now map those two things being the same thing. Board games are about trading resource cards and rolling dice to see what resources get added to the pool. Rather than it being taking a few more steps back and saying, no, role-playing game is really about a shared creative experience that can go in a lot of different directions. It could be very tactical combat. It could be very, storytelling, so on. And yeah, I kind of am curious to see if like the next 5 years we see that really start to change, because you mentioned Powered by the Apocalypse, like that, Avatar: The Last Airbender uses that engine, and it raised, I think, if it didn't break 10 million, it was close, on Kickstarter. To your earlier point, how many people are actually playing the game? We don't know.
Right. Is it out yet? And it's not even out. It's not. Is it in the wild?
Oh, no, it is. Yeah, it is. It's out there, and that's what's interesting is like how many
people are talking about it.
That's what's wild about the internet these days, because there was a time when everyone was kind of like maybe on Twitter or something, but now we're also seeing this sort of splintering of social media, especially, for all I know, there could be a Discord server out there with hundreds of thousands of people on it talking about this game. But unless I come across that Discord server, I don't know, right?
That's another thing that's happened to the industry. I find it interesting. Our conversation, not like any of the others, and I'm down with it. I think we're having a really good conversation. But that's always one of the things about the industry is that you can, I don't know, as a freelance cartoonist and game designer, my goal is to follow the 1,000 true fans model, right? If I can get 1,000 people, I don't know if you're familiar with the 1,000 true fans idea, but yes, you are. For people who aren't, the idea is that if you can have a true fan is defined as someone who's willing to spend $100 a year on you. If you get 1,000 people who are true fans, you're going to get $100,000 revenue, right? It's up to you to make that work. But 1,000 true fans is $100,000, and that's a business, right? So all you need is 1,000 people who are willing to spend $100 a year on you. So if you can get a group of 100,000 people who are playing your game, as a small company, you can make a good living out of that. As Wizards of the Coast, as D&D is what we think of as the traditional model, right? They need millions of people, and they things that will work at the scale of a small company won't work at the scale of a large company. And that's what happened in the collapse of TSR. All the Ravenloft and Dragonlance 5th Age and Dark Sun, they all had hundreds of thousands of, they all had thousands of people. They all had tens of thousands of people playing those games, but that wasn't enough. They needed to sell the upwards of 100,000 units, and they couldn't do that. So something that would have been a wild success for any other medium-sized company, let alone an independent publisher, is an utter failure for TSR, and the company collapses.
And right, and then it's a lot of it's because you have this sense of the business. So I'm going to tell a story about my time at Wizards. To bracket this is not exactly. This is not something that's unique to Wizards. This is something that happen in any business. So like, don't take this as a sign that you can run online and say Wizards is all fools. Like, no, this is just things that happen. Because So I'm going to start this with a saying that I read maybe like a year ago, because I've developed this amateur interest in economics, because I realize now that I'm getting older, I'm like, oh, economics really does run everything. Like, you really have to understand economics to understand the world as we live in. And there was this quote from an economist named Hayek, not Selma Hayek, but someone from like the 40s. And his quote is, "Information lives on the periphery." And the idea is, and he uses to as a critique of like centralized planning for governments, but I think it also applies to businesses. And this is going to tie to D&D and role playing.
Okay, I believe you.
I'll
let you run with this one.
So what happens is you have this like central group, like maybe running a company, that feels like, hey, we have to make all these decisions, because decisions are what important people do, especially decisions about what to invest in or what to say, hey, this is making enough money, let's put more money into it. But the information they need to make those decisions rests on the periphery, like with a game designer who's working on the product, or with like maybe the community manager who's out talking to people online, or with the players, right? Like, realistically, it's with the players. The players, maybe they don't know how to say it, but they know what they want. Like, when you show it to them, they'll buy it. The challenge is that I think fundamentally that tabletop role playing games don't scale up as in terms of not of a business, in terms of what you're selling, but in terms of business management. That the further the decision makers are from the people playing the game, the more layers there are between them, the business naturally starts to like go wobbly. And the example I like to use when I worked at Wizards was we were looking at the numbers behind, I think it was I forget what product it was. It was one of the products that came out before 5th edition, but after like 4th edition, we'd announced like,
right,
we're moving on to a new edition. And so I had this person from finance with their spreadsheet, and they had their laptop, and we're sitting in a meeting room, and we're okay. This product, if we sell 20,000 copies, how does that look financially? And they were like, oh, it's terrible. We're losing money. Okay, well, what if we sold 30,000 copies? It's losing money. Okay, what if we sold 50,000 copies, which at this time was like bananas, right? But I'm like, okay, still losing money. So at this point, my software engineering brain, it's pretty dusty, but it's back there, is starting to think. And also my system designer brain is like, wait a second. Hey, I want you, what if we sell 1 million units? And they're like, no, I'm not even going to enter that number. It's
all right, so we had another little hiccup. I am deciding, I'm making the managerial decision that I'm going to stop drawing. That's going to take some relief on my machine, and we'll just have a conversation. I'm going to finish up that drawing. You got to see where it was at. I got a good ways through that sketch. I'll finish it up. Those of you who are subscribed to our free newsletter, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com, will be the first people to get to see it when it's completed, and other behind the scenes info. So sign up there if you want to see that before the rest of the world does. Meanwhile, Mike, you were talking about some very interesting stuff that we got cut off on twice. So I don't know what you want to do to reset the table, and let's just finish out this conversation like all people who don't draw while they're talking.
Yeah. So I will smush it down. So basically, the idea is we were working on a spreadsheet that said, hey, is this TTRPG product profitable or not? Didn't matter how many units sold we punched into it. It was saying, you're going to lose money. You shouldn't do this product. Well, what it turned out was the person who built the spreadsheet, and they did this in good faith, right? I don't want people to come away thinking, oh, these people are fools. Like, these are just mistakes like this happen. Because when they went around and got their numbers, everyone gave them their numbers as a percentage. Like, oh, to make a product, X percent of your revenue will go to this, Y will go to that. And they're doing this over the course of multiple days, building the spreadsheet, looking at it, and it turned out the costs were always going to be like 120% of revenue or something like that. And that to me is an example of this idea that TTRPGs, what's weird about them, and this is something I think is I don't know, this is my heretical output. People in the business think TTRPGs are super unique in terms of the content and product. I 100% disagree. I think they are just products like anything else. Where TTRPGs are really weird and strange and difficult is in the business side of it. We're making books that require super bespoke layouts, super bespoke art, super bespoke writing, and then game design on top of it. When I worked on Magic, a Magic card is super predictable. I had to make a card. It's gonna have a piece of art. It's gonna have a frame. My game design has to fit on this card. If I tell a designer go make 20 cards, I know I'm getting 20 cards back. They can't give me a card with like 5 cards worth of text on it. Like, it's a natural limiting factor. The production side, I need to print decks of 60 cards. Like, okay, it's 60. A lot of the ways it's still hard, but it's very knowable. At TTRPG, if I ask some designers, hey, go design 10 spells, what we kind of do today is say how many words we think that will be.
Right.
But then that also creates this perverse incentive. Like, okay, you hired me to write 2,000 words, so I'll do 200 words per spell. Is that really enough? Like, I don't know. Like, I would argue that like a spell that takes more than like 50 words might be too many. Do I really want to try running this? Like, we don't have that handle on how to actually make the content because we don't have those natural limiting factors that board games or miniatures or card games have, where just the product is the game piece, right? I buy a commander deck for Magic. I buy a copy of Settlers of Catan. The game board is one of the big physical elements of it. Like, you couldn't ship a board game with a 10-foot by 8-foot board and expect to sell it in stores, right? Like, no, it just doesn't make sense. So you're going to scope down. RPGs, though, I think in some ways the book is like one of those things that's very difficult for us to wrestle with because you can kind of print anything you want on a page, which then is good, but also comes with a lot of drawbacks. And this goes all the way back to this idea of like information being at the periphery, that we don't really know the audience. We still don't know. 50 years later, we still really don't know. Like, streaming has helped a lot. We've made a lot of steps, but we don't have that easy way to measure. Like, hey, was this a fun game? The biggest difference between working on Magic and working on role-playing games, and I like to use Magic as an example because I was there for like several years, as opposed to board games. We could just come up with some cards and play test them immediately, and then we could just be like, "Hey, that wasn't fun," or "That was fun." And that is a very quick, tight cycle. Role-playing games don't have that, and that's their big difference between them and every other type of game. It's really hard to test this stuff, and I think that's kind of the interesting thing we're seeing now is we have so many people making games now. I have this kind of theory that lurking out there somewhere is the Settlers of Catan of role-playing games. Someone's working on it right now. And when it comes out, it's going to radically change the business. And because it wasn't too long ago, in 1995, you went to people and said, hey, what's the biggest hobby board games? They would tell you games that had been around for like a couple decades, that had established followings, that people were playing. They were probably war games, or there were games like Titan, which was like essentially a war game with a fantasy flavor. But it took Settlers to come along and say, no, here's what you can actually do in this space. And then we went from essentially battle games to deck builders, trading games, all these different types of games. But it took Settlers to do it, to like kind of flip things and then get everyone to start looking at the business very differently. So for me, that's what I think we're going to see in the next 5 years.
I guess. So here's the challenge, and this has been the challenge. We used to call it the dirty little secret, is that the thing about role-playing games is that once you have the game, you don't need to buy anything else. So designing a new game is not going to change that. It's really, if it's still a role-playing game that is what is recognizable for us, whichever nomenclature we call it under, right? Once you buy the game itself, the rules itself are not what you're using week to week. You're using a story. You're using an event with your friends, and the mechanics. You never need to buy more mechanics. You've bought the floor. You've bought the card deck, the basic Hoyle's bicycle card deck. You can play as many games as you want with that, and except for wearing out the cards, you never need to buy a new one. And role-playing games have that same problem, in that what people are trying to invent is a new thing that people will want to keep buying over and over, and then your game will thrive.
And that's the thing, and it's why I like how you put problem in quotes, because this is another error, I think, when people look at role-playing games. They think, oh, this is such a unique problem, we need to solve it immediately. And to me, that goes back to like, the information isn't getting to these decision makers.
Yeah.
Because if we take that same problem and apply it to other areas, hey, this Star Wars came out in 1977. I don't need to see any more Star Wars. I saw the movie. No, because we understand intuitively, like, hey, people like these characters. They want to see more, right? Star Trek, same way. Next Generation, right? It's not even the same characters. Why would I know it? Because it's just really fun. Like, Next Generation's great, right? Like, it reignited the entire franchise. Video games have the same thing, right? Like, if I'm playing League of Legends, wait a second, they give this game away for free, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you only pay for cosmetic upgrades, but it's a huge business. And if you pitch that to the people who are making the business decisions, they would think you're like, yeah, okay, like, thanks for working here, and here's your severance, right?
Right.
But League of Legends is enormous, right? Like, because it took someone really understanding the players to go, hey, where is the value? For League, it's not in selling the new characters and expansions; it's selling the cosmetics, and it's a massive business. The free to play games, similar thing, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah. All the free to
you know,
play games function on that.
yeah,
They give you the baseline, and what they're counting on, that almost doesn't matter. I mean, we know it really does matter a lot, but it almost doesn't matter because their business is selling you the tchotchkes, the extra things that don't change. The game is still playing the way the game plays. The difference is what you look like, how you
yeah.
represent to the world.
Exactly, and that matters to players in a way that makes them go, "Oh, I want that. That's cool." It's like dice, like we were just talking earlier about dice, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like
Why
it
do
has
people
no
buy
effect
a
on
dozen more
gameplay.
dice? Because these, oh, look at these dice are really cool. They've got Hellboy stuff on them, so I have
Yeah,
them. Do I need those dice? No, I've got 8,000 other dice over in this bag over here. But I wanted these.
yep. And when you look at a game like trading card games have also with Magic the Gathering, you could easily argue, do you need more Magic cards? Like, you enjoyed, the newest set came out. You're playing. I'm blanking on the name of the newest set. I literally had to force myself to stop playing Magic. So I'm like, I can't do it for work anymore, and it'll
Yeah,
just consume my entire life. The because I love Magic. The even though I'm not so great at it. The but yeah, like when a new set comes out, like, oh cool, like I want the new set
right.
because that's a great example of and there are people who kind of don't get it, like, why are you buying more cards or chasing money? No, because what I love about Magic is the riddle of solving the new set.
Right. Well,
What was the
Magic's an
cool
interesting
juxtaposition, right?
difference because it is a different game when you add new cards into it. Right.
Yes, yeah,
That
exactly.
that's why it sets why trading card games are such the beautiful sweet spot business wise.
Yeah,
You do
yeah,
need them. It,
because we understand the product is what the player wants,
yeah.
right? Like, give me a new card, I like it, and but it's a huge mistake to then say, oh, because Magic works this way, should League of Legends
Right.
work that way? No, you'd probably kill League of Legends if you tried selling new champions. People wouldn't want that. The and that to me is like we're no closer to figuring that out for TTRPGs today than I think we were 50 years ago.
I
Which is
think
why I like working on it, right? Like, that's what's fun about it.
well, I think that you the thing you're pointing out is you for TTRPGs it's never you can't make it that Magic TCGs are a different thing. You can't make RPGs TRPGs function that way. We found that I said you reminded me of a thing even within what we were talking about earlier, the worlds that everyone loved in Dragonlance. There I don't know 150 200 Dragonlance novels that have come out ever, but there are 20 of them which do the vast majority of the sales. We had when I came on the team, that Margaret and Tracy had stopped working with the company, but they were still putting out a Dragonlance novel every month, and none of them sold. It's only when Margaret and Tracy came back and wrote a novel, and you could look at it. Part of it is the quality of their writing. I'm not going to say that's not, and it's maybe a huge part of it. But what we also found was when we did the Fifth Age, which was not by them. We had Gene Raby did the novels for the original Fifth Age. We got the same thing, and the company, to an extent, finally realized it's the storyline, it's the soap opera. no one,
Yep.
the audience for the side stories is really small, but the audience for what comes next, the story expands, is huge. Star
Yep.
Wars the same way, right? What put out a new movie, if it takes those characters and a storyline forward, everyone's in. Everyone needs to know what happens next.
Yeah. And you can see even like huge properties struggling with that, right? Like, I mean, Star Wars is an example of that, where they've had some hits, like The Mandalorian, but they've also struggled with other shows.
Yeah,
And then Marvel, I think, is similar, where it's like,
yeah,
okay, we had Avengers, and that was fantastic. And then, but now, like the movies, like where are they kind of going? Does it really fit
yeah.
together? And again, they're kind of these points where like they have some hits. Like I really liked a Loki, was a show I
Right,
followed.
right.
But there's other times I'll be talking to friends like, oh, did you watch the Hawkeye series? Like, I didn't even know that existed. Right? And it may be awesome, but like it's just different now, right? Like the and
I
I think
think
that's the tricky thing, you know?
I think Marvel succeeded in that. The Marvel movies succeeded in that they told the different. First of all, they told really good stories, but they succeeded in letting you, even the casual audience member, see, oh, I can see the line this is building on. And the new stuff they're putting out, the audience can't see that line. I believe that it's
No,
there. They're building it. Eventually, they may get them to come back when it's revealed, but that's what's missing, is the audience understanding why this is building on that. Why these two just seem unrelated. Why do I care what
yep.
happened in Hawkeye? Well, it's gonna come back around here.
Well, but then let's also think of the business reality. They decided collectively, hey, everything streaming is where everything goes. So instead of
Yeah,
movies, we're going to do series. And I have this is my theory, and this is if I was in charge of it, if Kevin Feige called me up and said, Mearls, go back in time, because I have to go back in time to do this. But fix Marvel or whatever. The to me, like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier gave a great template. If it had been a movie, because it would have explained, hey, the snap. Here's what happened back on Earth,
yeah,
and then you can kind of see like, oh, the events of Endgame. It's great. We undid it. Oh, wait a sec. Action now consequences.
yeah,
Well, now we see what happens when suddenly, honestly, like, your economy is going to fall to ruin if suddenly half the population goes away. All these social problems, then people come back. So now we have
yeah.
another thing. And so this would have been my pitch. This is purely me now, just showing off. Here's what I've done. But like, but I'll give you an example. If it turned out to be something like, oh, the snap happened and this guy kind of came up and became really important and kind of fixed everything. This guy Victor Von Doom, like, oh, he's just a super smart guy who fixed everything. Oh, but now Reed Richards has come back. Now all these others, Tony Stark is back. Like, oh, now and then maybe if he becomes a villain, like, oh, I get why he's the villain.
Yeah.
Because when everything was crappy, he ran, or whatever, whoever it is, right? But I think the problem they had with Kang as a villain, and I think they've abandoned that, was like it didn't really like, wait, why Kang? Like I don't get it, right? Like why, as opposed to Thanos being like, oh, I see how it all fits together. To your point,
Yeah.
And I know for me, my friends and family who weren't into Marvel, they were following the movies back then because they did love that. Oh, I saw this, now I understand why that. So
Yeah. All right. So we've now been going pretty close to an hour, maybe a little more. Hard to tell with all the interruptions in the middle. But interestingly, because we've been talking, this conversation has gone the way it has. I usually segue to, "Whoa, it's the 50th anniversary. What do you think?" But we've been kind of touching on that the whole way through, which is great. But it's been a peripheral. So let's just kind of, for this last little bit, let's just kind of think about. All right, so we're here. We're 50 years of D&D and hobby tabletop role playing games as a thing. Which it always boggles my mind to just put that before those 50 years. It didn't exist at all. Like everything that has to do with role playing games fits in that bubble. As you were saying, as we've been talking about, that's got a lot of different permutations, and it's own thing, and it interacts with business and commerce in a weird way. Um, and we've had a big uh, growth in the last 10 years. um, which to me means there's an opportunity for another big growth, right? As you gather more people together, that gives you the power for launching forward. What that you've just talked about, getting your time machine and going backwards. You want to get in your time machine and go forwards. What
Yes, yeah.
what do you
So
what do you think you might see?
it's really interesting where we are right now because I think the if you followed like D&D Beyond, the online tools for D&D, they're now adding in third party content. And I am blanking on his name, but I listened to the Ghostfire Games as a podcast. I'm also blanking on the name of the podcast. So hey, you should go listen to it if you can kind of figure out from my vague recollection of it. But they were talking about this because Ghostfire Games has had several titles on D&D Beyond, and the host of the podcast referred to D&D Beyond as like the Steam of TTRPGs, and that to me was like, oh, that's really interesting because I think that would be a really interesting future for TTRPGs, especially for stuff that's like D&D compatible.
Yeah.
Where Wizards is, Hasbro Wizards is thinking, hey, we now kind of maybe could sell everybody's stuff. And that might actually cut the Gordian knot of like, hey, we need to like make D&D look kind of like Magic. Like if instead you're thinking more like, hey, we're a distributor and we have a platform. Right. And it's funny because in digital gaming overall, there's kind of this move. People are thinking more in terms of like platform is like sales, distribution, rather than game innovation. How do I, rather than making an exciting new game, how do I make games available in ways that they weren't available before? Kind of rough. And like that could be a really interesting thing where, in some ways, I think the technology I may have mentioned earlier is catching up to where role playing games want to be. And in some ways, I think that helps, like that lets the publisher of Dungeons and Dragons maybe catch up to where they want to be, where they're like, hey, Dungeons and Dragons is a really fun game, and it is kind of a platform for creativity. What if we just made it so you could go buy other people's stuff, right? And then I think that's good for publishers. I think that's good for the business side. I think that actually resolves a lot of the tension of like, how do we force you to buy something, right? Well, we don't really need to because you'll take care of it yourself because we've got a community of publishers and creators who will just make cool stuff. And that might actually solve it. Like I said, I'm really excited to see where it goes. Yep. I'm a little biased because like I know some of the people working on DVD on, and I think they're really smart. I think they're doing cool stuff. But like I really like the maps. Their virtual tabletop is great. And I love how it's integrated. And I'm going to admit, I'm going to sound like a heretic here for someone of my age. I own the 2024 Player's Handbook and Monster Manual, both digitally and not Monster Manual, DMG. Physically and digitally, I don't think I'm going to buy the physical Monster Manual because I realize now It's been a couple months, and I'm actually running a game tonight as we're taping, and it's like, oh yeah, I have those books. They're back here on my shelf, and I haven't touched them because I just use D&D Beyond for everything, and so yeah, I just don't think I can justify it because I'm just like, yeah, I don't like, I even the collector in me is like, maybe we'll see in February when Monster Manual comes out, will I get the limited edition cover? But like, it's wild how I just don't use the books at all anymore. And attached to that is like when I've had players show up with like third-party stuff. They didn't even know they were using it because they just, that looks cool. The Illiver, that's cool. I'll just buy it. I'm gonna make an Illiver as my new character, right? And that's the MCDM guy. And I kind of curious to see where that goes and like what does that mean and the sort of marketplace of ideas because because I think that might be a way to kind of cut that Gordian knot is to get rather than have to worry about getting people to buy the next book, like that's no longer actually your problem. Your problem as a business becomes just how do I make that next book available to players and make it so they know it's there and they want to go buy it. And yeah, so we'll see. I just wouldn't be surprised if like in 3 years, where it's like, oh, Wizards, their big thing is that they have this really handy marketplace that we use. This really great tool. And there's official D&D books that come out, but that's just that's just part of this other broader marketplace.
The challenge, I think, is, and in a way, this always has been a challenge. How much of their market that exists now doesn't interact with that, doesn't go to D&D Beyond, right? And so they've got to. You can play D&D anywhere. I mean, that's the part. Go back to that dark secret, right? Once you have the games, you can do anything you want with them. and that's great, and that continues to be the case. For what you're talking about to be successful, they have to build D&D Beyond to become the platform that everyone wants to use.
Yeah.
And that's kind of completely separate from the game. It's a different, and they've struggled with that over the years. Wizards has
Yeah.
struggled with that over the years,
Yeah.
and it continues to be a problem that they can make the game. They always have been able. Lots of people, they can make the game, but they want the 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 game is the match now. It's not even the engine. It's not the fire it's the match that starts the fire. Right?
Yeah.
They've got to build the other thing. And for role playing, as opposed to looking just at D&D, I think you're right that whoever wins that platform war will have solved that riddle. Right? They will have the thing that everyone wants to go there, and they want to buy the things there.
Because I think that might be a world where, do people really want to buy content in the sense like more monster stat box, whatever? Like what I've found to be the most useful, like I run both games in person and online, but one of the through lines I find is like I take my notes in, I use PowerPoint because it's easy for me to draw on. But I love that, like, hey, when I run my game, say tomorrow, I'm gonna open my PowerPoint, I'm gonna have my little map, I have my little tokens that I've moved around for the players, I have my stat blocks. I don't have to do any prep because I sit there and think because I took my notes and I just saved them and closed it. Like that kind of stuff. Like, would I pay for that? Yeah, I'd pay $20 a month for that because that's actual value to me, which means I get to play more D&D.
Right.
That's the value that I want. Is make it possible for me to play more role playing games. I played far more Magic once I got Arena, than because I could just go and play. Now D&D is a bit different role playing because I don't want to play with strangers, right? But still, like, make it so I can fit, those games into an hour, and I think, or whatever, or my prep is 0 because it's just pressing the button.
Yeah.
It remembers it all for me. And I think that's going to be curious to see where that goes. And that goes back to, it's me, like, with my quotes, because, it's that. But yeah, that's like any digital platform is going to be driven by your users. You can't mandate that. You got to match your product, the product fit, I think is what they call it in tech. Without it, people don't need your thing. They won't buy it. So.
Yeah. All right, I was about to say something, but that was going to start another 20-minute conversation, and we don't have that right now. But like I say, with so many of my guests, it'd be great to come back and do this again.
Let's do it.
Because the short version is, for years I've been in my head working on different variations on a game, creating a game that's based off the experience that we got out of the demos we do at Gen Con every year. Because it's an hour, where you have an hour to play a thing, and they're super popular. And even people who don't play the game come in and play it and say, "Where can I buy this thing?" And the answer is, you can't. It's a simplification of this other thing.
Yep.
So yes, that's been a thing that I've been trying to. That's a knot I've been trying to solve or cut for a while, just for me. And I agree that that's beyond it. If you can then find the audience with it, that's a game changer. Anyway,
exactly.
Having said all that, Mike, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me. I've had a lot of fun. Sorry for the technical issues that have made this a little more challenging, but I think we had a good conversation anyway.
It was a ton of fun. It was a ton of fun talking to you. Yeah, always a pleasure. So yeah, and thanks so much for having me on. And yeah, if you want to, I'd be totally up for having. I love talking about role playing. That's the secret to my life. Is I managed to position myself where I get to talk about tabletop games, like full time professionally. So I made it to almost 50. So I got like another 10 years to go, working. And so hopefully I can so keep everyone at Chaos I'm happy. So I can go in another 10 years. So
right. All right, so Mike, have a very Merry Christmas. I know this will be launching; it will already be Christmas. Have a good rest of your holiday season. What do you have coming up in 2025? And you know what?
Yeah,
I really want to talk about the fact that you have a Patreon where folks can find you, or Patreon.
So my Patreon, yep.
slash Mike Mearls, all one word.
So I have two main things I'm working on. One is I'm working with Chaosium for a product we're launching next year. I can't talk about it yet though. We haven't done
Fair
an
enough.
announcement. But also, since like my day job is like, for the first time I get to work on D&D without, it's not my day job. I just get to do it for fun.
Right.
The Patreon is literally me just like, here's the self-indulgent version of D&D that I would publish, that I will probably publish with crowdfunding probably within the next year or so. And I just get to make stuff, and I talk about it on X, on Twitter. I throw stuff up there and let people critique it, and if like, oh, that makes sense, I change it. Or if I disagree, I don't change it because I'm just doing this for fun. I'm not trying to hit a sales number for my business team. So like, I appreciate your candor. You can go make your own game and make it work that way, but I'm going to do it this way because that's just
Right.
how I want to do it. So it's been really fun. So, and I'm super blessed. I love working with Chaosium. Really super fun team. Working a cool new game. I hope we'll see what happens with it, but I got my fingers crossed. I'm super excited. Like every designer, I'm like, this is so exciting and awesome. But we'll see what happens. I will say it's not Call of Cthulhu. That's in Mike Mason's hands. Very capable Mike Mason's hands. I've got to see what he's got planned for the next couple of years, and it's awesome. So I'm super excited for that. So, but yeah, so it's pretty exciting stuff. So
excellent. All right, well, we'll look forward to that. You and I will, continue to chat, and hopefully I'll get you back on sometime in 2025 for more, maybe with another group of folks. I was saying before, I want to get some group conversations going. I don't know how they fit in with me drawing, but maybe that turns out to be something that doesn't happen every episode. All right, so I'm going to take you off screen for a minute. Hold on, and then you and I can make our farewells after I do this little outro. Thank you again, Mike.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, so there it was. That was our Christmas episode, my conversation with Mike Mearls. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I know that I'm now going to be going into the editing suite and trying to pull it all together. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like for you, but I know that given what we talked about, it's going to be fun. As I said before, we have a free newsletter, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. If you subscribe there, you will get updates on what's going to happen. You'll know who's our guests are when, and some shows that only you'll be invited to see. And of course, you'll get to see all the drawings before anyone else does. If I finish one, I'll take it to the newsletter first. So please come on there. Also, wherever you're watching, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, please do the things. The likes, give me a like, give me a smile, subscribe to the channel, all those things. Everyone talks about them. I will tell you why. It's not because it makes me feel better, though it does. It's because it helps use the systems as they exist to share this show with more people. When you give it a like, when you click the thumbs up or leave a comment, it helps this show get introduced to more fans of this kind of material. So please take the time, just do that. I very much would appreciate it. Other than that, I'm going to wish you all a very Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah or whatever holiday you celebrate this time of year. I hope that it's going very well. Hope everyone has a really good New Year. Next week will be New Year's Day. We'll have another recorded show. Don't know right now what that is going to be, but I hope you come back and see it. And then I'll see you in the new year. Till then, take care, everyone. Bye.